Hello and welcome to TEFAF 2025. It's also the gallery's 100th anniversary. It was started by my father in 1925, and he showed one of his favorite artists was Paul Klee, who he first came across in 1928 and then showed several times from about 1933 in the gallery. So we have an extraordinary painting here, which is a portrait of Girke, who was an early it was a big supporter of his. And this painting was, I believe, in the first exhibition of Klee in America. And she took it to America with her in 1933 and owned it till 1938, where it then passed through to Catherine Q in Chicago, who was a legendary figure in the arts there, who sold it to a client of hers who had stayed in the family till 2015, when it was bought by clients of ours who now wish to resell it. It's a lovely way of celebrating our 100th birthday. We have a very diverse collection of works, as is our taste. We have here an extraordinary painting by Constant, who I think is highly underrated, and this is one of the few paintings, although there weren't very many paintings in this series of New Babylon paintings, this is one of the very few New Babylon paintings still in private hands. I'd always liked his work, but when I saw the exhibition a few years ago at the Reina Sofia, there was an amazing retrospective. I realized what an extraordinary artist he was. And we did a little retrospective of Frieze Masters a few years ago. But he really, this is a painting that could never bore me. We have a Tajiri, whose centennial was last year, and this is an ode to Billie Holiday and was made when he was living in Paris. And it's recently come back from an extraordinary show that started at the Grey Art Museum and went a bit around America. It's an honor to have it. So we've mixed it with, I think, one of the great Bruce Connors. It's the best painting by Bruce Connor I ever sold, and I've sold several. It's called Homage to Mae West. And this has been only in 2 or 3 collections and has never really been on the market, because when I bought it, I sold it immediately to somebody, a client who's now left England and has nowhere to put it, so he wishes to sell it. Jan Henderikse, a small, typical, when he sort of pop null series. It went to Henk Peters, his son, and remained there till very recently when they bought it. Filko, who I think is a very interesting artist from Slovakia. I really like the 60s works, and that's basically what I've collected, but you couldn't be more a la mode with these rockets over this map, which has Ukraine and everybody in it. Sort of balanced little group, Gravenitz, Miyawaki, who then, and that's with ground marble, and then a very beautiful little Schendel. So I think that they all pick up each other's colors. A perfect little Cornell box that has the Medici symbols in it and all the sort of things you associate with Cornell. This wall has a bit of grit to it, ochre, then an extraordinary Canogar that was in the Biennale a number of years ago. The ones I really excite me the most are 58, 59 and 60, and we're going to do a retrospective in June, July of those years. Here we have, I think, an artist I only discovered very few years ago, Feliza Bursztyn. She was conceived in Poland but born in Colombia in 1933. Her parents were Polish refugees. I think they managed to take some money with them. She was educated later in Paris and New York, and then went back to Colombia, dying in very beginning of 82 in Paris, but had to escape from Colombia in 81, where she was politically unacceptable at the time. For oppressive regime. People say it's about Chamberlain. It's nothing at all to do with Chamberlain. It's, okay, they're car parts. Part of her narrative in life, she was nearly killed in a car crash, late teens or early 20s, which may have a relevance to the use of cars, but there's something extraordinary. She's not really known that much. We did a show at Frieze Masters this last year, and previously the Musée Souche in Switzerland did an amazing retrospective, but otherwise virtually unknown in Europe. I want to change that. To finish this wall off, we have a Fontana. It's not gold, it's brass, and that's when he was in New York. He did those extraordinary cut on brass. A rather gentle wall compared. So this is a Zangs. Zangs has got an exhibition in Germany at a museum at the moment. He apparently was quite a difficult man, I think a very interesting man, and at one exhibition he was asked some perfectly harmless, inane, and he stormed off, but before that he peed the whole way round all the walls of the gallery and left. A very interesting early Simetti, and then we have, so this is the Italian threesome, Colombo, and then two from the Argentine. Carlos Cairoli, who we've shown a few times, came over to France in the early 50s, and Tomasella, who also came over, and he lived in Paris. He lived to a ripe old age and never had an assistant. He did actually have one of his girlfriend's father, who was an ex-American Air Force general, who was in his same sort of age, and he'd help him in the studio. And Cairoli, I think, is an absolutely fascinating artist. He was a constructivist and things, and he did show with a lot of the constructivists, but very, very underrated artist too. We have the work on paper selection. Surrealism, last year was the 100th birthday, and we did a show which we did with Timothy Baum. You can find a walkthrough on our website of the show. Dominguez, who was the person who invented the calcomanie with Marcel Jean. This one used to belong to Marcel Jean. Max Ernst, and the Max Ernst was in the VVW portfolio, and this one used to belong to David Hare. David Hare arranged to do this portfolio with Breton. It ended rather badly by Hare running off with Breton's wife. Beautiful little early artist proof for a small multiple. He did 3 editions, and this is the middle one. And if one can get it, the little star sparkles. This is extremely rare self-portrait by Nadia, who was Breton's muse, but the relationship was only 11 days. She went to asylum, and that was it. And the famous book dealer, collector Destribin, spent a lot of time trying to trace her family, and did, and bought all of the few drawings she had left. And this is he said one of the proudest things in his life was actually finding the family. A Bellmer poupée, and below is a Georges Hugnet, who was probably one of the great collagists of the 20th century. Conceptualism. On top we have Cola, and here we have Braco, Paul Tech. And then there's this very amusing Billy Apple. He did a series called the Presidential Suite, and this is the one of Johnson and Humphrey at a barbecue. And there's poor Hubert Humphrey sort of trying to get some acknowledgement, and you feel LBJ saying, who is this person behind me? Abstraction. There are 2 studies by Marlowe Moss. And then we found this group, a very strange, weren't just a joke because she signed and dated them. I think we have 8 of them in all. She was in St. Ives and everything, been told by Mondrian to get in touch with Ben Nicholson, and Ben Nicholson never asked to see her. Maybe there's a bit of Hepworth and Moore in it. I've no idea, but they give enormous pleasure. 2 computer printouts by Vera Molnar, who died just over a year ago, just short of her 100th birthday. It's always extraordinary to think how these were made. When they had to do them at night because in the university computers, which were probably bigger than this whole stand. You can see the oink oink coming out, how the paper came in. We have a Luciano here. This is ink. Intensity of it is extraordinary. She was in the show that's on at the Tate now called Electric Dreams, and she's about to have a show in Major Gallery in New York. So watch this space. And above is, to me, the most important post-war abstract artist out of Hungary, back. And there's something really extraordinary about this drawing. Morellet from his most sought-after series, which was the telephone book. So he would get the last number of each page, and if it was odd, it would be the lighter color, and if it was even, it'd be the darker color. So, there's a lot of work and thought going through that. He was a great friend of Gravenitz, who was there, and Gravenitz was all chance, and the one we have there, he'd spin a coin. If it was even, it was flat, and if it was odd, it was carved out. Girke, Raimund Girke, who is an artist I absolutely adore from the 60s, and I worked it out the other day that he did have a show with Raimund and things in America, but he never showed in America, because it wasn't really till 1976, 77 when Xavier Fourcade showed Baselitz for the first time, was when Americans would accept buying German art as a hangover from the war. But I'm sure that if he had been shown in the 60s in New York, it would be a totally different story, because they're as intellectual and as beautiful as the Agnes Martins of the 60s, which I was the first person to show her work in Europe in the Bâle Art Fair in 1974. This is on a rough canvas, and then after that it's on a smooth linen, but still the same idea is there. There's such beauty and intensity in it. Manzoni from the sort of Wig series, it's been basically in one collection since a very famous Dutch collection, Martin Wieser, and then it went down through his family. You have the sort of Warhol fright wig. Verena Losenberg, she was one of the 4 Zurich concrete artists, but she was the only woman, and she definitely knew how to paint, and the quality of the paint is terribly important, whereas Max Bill really didn't so much care about the paint and how it's done. And it's freehand. I think she's just extraordinary. We were the first people to give her an exhibition in London a few years ago, again at Frieze Masters. And then we gave a show, I think 3 years ago, at TEFAF New York, which I think was the first show she ever had in America. So we were the first people to show her in England and in America. This is a very late painting by Kurt Seligman. This is from 1961, and he was to die under tragic circumstances at the beginning of 62. Probably the greatest artist to come out of Basel anyway, if not Switzerland, in the 20th century. He was an early member of the Surrealists, and he'd been also with Abstract Création there. And it's incredibly modern. He had one problem which few artists had, which he had money, and it was always a disadvantage to have money. And he, if somebody wanted to buy one of his things, he'd say, "No, please, Max Ernst needs the money, buy one of his," and which has sort of not helped his career. But he's a very, very, he was also a world expert on black magic. But there's something very exciting, and we've placed it so that from here, it's as if the head could be a fan waking up the wig. This is by Kuwama, who sadly died last year. But the surface is beautiful, and this sort of dripping down on the gold background. This is Klaus Stout, who we're going to have a show of in April and May. I think he's absolutely brilliant, the concept. And this is so simple. The color of the background is just caused by having this gray plexi. But the play and the light on it is always quite extraordinary. Finally, Stanzak, who's represented in this Kandinsky and afterwards show at the museum in Potsdam. I think we're going to have a show of his at the end of the year again. He escaped Poland and they went to Siberia as a young man. He lost the use of his right hand, and he was right-handed and became this artist with only one arm, and he never had assistants either. He would do this by taping. So in this case, he used the background of that, painted the whole canvas that color, then would tape those out and put the next one on and everything. And how you can do this with one hand making the thing, I don't know. But I think he was influenced by Albers, the homage to the square, putting colors together to make another color. He completely relaxes you and makes a very, very happy experience. And then finally, Miguel Chevalier, who really one of the first people to use the computer to generate art. And he has a lot of museum shows around the place. One work isn't here. It's being held hostage at the moment by the Centre Pompidou. It's a work by Waldemar Cordeiro, who it is his 100th birthday. And this work had been in the Biennale, and there was another work in the Biennale belonging to the Centre Pompidou, and somehow they got switched. But hopefully it will arrive in time. If it doesn't, we're doing a TEFAF New York little retrospective to celebrate what would have been his 100th birthday. I do hope that you all can come and see it. We're very immensely proud of this, and it's a nice way of celebrating the gallery's 100th birthday. Thank you.